On my wedding day, my father-in-law tried to humiliate me in front of everyone for wearing my late father's suit. He thought I'd stay silent. Months later, I struck back, quietly, patiently, until the night came when his crown slipped, and everyone saw the truth. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you. My name is Ethan, I'm 29, and my wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. It was supposed to be about love, celebration, and a fresh start. Instead, it became the opening scene of a silent, personal war. And the weapon that started it all? My late father's wedding suit. The suit wasn't just fabric. It was a piece of history stitched with memories. My father wore it when he married my mother, years before life decided to take him away from me too early. When I slipped into it that morning, I felt like he was right there with me, standing tall, hand on my shoulder, telling me I could handle anything. But apparently, my father-in-law didn't see it that way. To him, it wasn't tradition. It wasn't sentiment. It was an insult. It started subtly. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, the way a snobby restaurant critic scans a menu before deciding everything is beneath them. Then came the smirk, that tiny, smug twist at the corner of his mouth that told me I was about to be his main course for the day. And in front of hundreds of guests, he let loose words sharp enough to slice through my chest. Comments about how cheap I looked, how my dead man's hand-me-downs were unfit for his daughter's big day. Every laugh in the crowd felt like another brick being stacked on my chest. I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I just smiled politely, but inside, my blood was boiling. This wasn't just an insult to me, it was a slap in the face to my father's memory. Right then, in the middle of the ceremony preparations, I made myself a silent promise. This man would regret every single word. And I wasn't going to just hurt his pride, I was going to bury it in front of everyone he ever wanted to impress. I kept my composure that day, and that alone seemed to irritate him more. My father-in-law, Harold, thrived on reactions. He was the kind of man who fed on discomfort the way sharks feed on blood in the water. If you flinched, you were dinner. So I smiled. Not the warm, happy kind of smile people give on their wedding day. No, mine was the kind you wear when you're already sharpening knives in your head. Harold strutted around like he was the groom. His booming voice carried across the room as he told stories about his business deals, his expensive vacations, his high standards. It was as if the wedding was just a networking event for him, and I was the unfortunate backdrop. The moment that burned into me the most wasn't even his initial insult, it was the way he leaned over to a group of guests and loudly wondered how his daughter ended up marrying a man who couldn't even buy a new suit for his wedding. He said it like I wasn't standing right there. I glanced at my wife, hoping for even a flicker of disapproval from her. But she just looked uncomfortable, not angry, not defensive. Just caught between loyalty to her father and loyalty to me, which, on that day, felt like a losing battle. The photographer caught the moment too. In one of the official wedding photos, I'm in the background, smiling at Harold, but my eyes are cold. It's the kind of picture you look back on later and realize you were watching the fuse being lit. I knew one thing, Harold's entire identity was built on his reputation. He cared about appearances more than he cared about relationship. He lived for respect, admiration, and control. And if I was going to take revenge, it wouldn't be with fists or shouting. It would be with the one thing he couldn't tolerate losing, public respect. And I already had an idea forming. I spent the week after the wedding acting like nothing happened. I went to work, smiled at neighbors, posted a happy photo, and wrote a caption that sounded normal. On the inside, I was building a map. Not the kind with roads, but the kind with cracks. Every person has them. Every empire has them. I just needed to find where Harold hid his. I started with the obvious. Reputation. He guarded it like a dragon sits on gold. He loved being the man with a plan, the donor with a plaque, the guest who never waited in line. He always parked in the front row even if it meant the valet had to move everyone else around him like puzzle pieces. He hunted applause the way a kid hunts the last slice of pizza. I could use that hunger. Money mattered, but not like most people think. He already had more than he needed. He didn't crave zeros. He craved clapping. He wanted his name spelled right on banners. He wanted people to whisper his name as if it had weight. His money was a trumpet and he woke up every day just to blow it louder. I could use that too. Power was the last pillar. He needed to be the voice in every room. He spoke like a judge passing sentence. He ate meals like a king inspecting the first bite. He had a look that told people to change their minds before they even shared them. I watched it at the wedding. Older relatives, business friends, the planner who hid her eyes every time he raised his hand. He moved through people like a ship cuts water and left a wake of small, nervous smiles behind him. That wake told me everything I needed to know. His power wasn't rooted in respect. It was rooted in fear. Fear has a weak spine. I wasn't going to throw a punch. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break anything except a story he told about himself. If I broke that story in daylight, the rest would collapse on its own. The path opened when I remembered a charity gala he bragged about all through our engagement. He served on the planning board. He called it the crown of the season. Attendees wore suits that cost more than cars. The event had a glass stage with floating candles under it, because of course it did. He talked about his speech like it would be carved into a monument. He even practiced his smile in the mirror once when he thought no one was watching. The gala lived on a date circled in bold on his calendar. If his life had a window, that night was the crystal pane. I needed to be close to the pane without making noise. I reached out to people who did invisible work around him. The florist who always fixed things at the last minute. The photo assistant who carried lights and rolled wires and remembered who paid on time. The baker who felt a tiny sting every time he asked for a discount while claiming he supported small businesses. I didn't ask for secrets. I asked for stories. People give stories freely when they feel heard. Every story showed me the same pattern. He liked to control the script, and he counted on no one else holding a copy. I wrote down what mattered. He always commanded the microphone first. He insisted on reading names himself so he could mispronounce people he didn't like and emphasize those he wanted to impress. He hated being interrupted. He hated the sound of an error next to his name. He hated the idea that anyone might believe he took credit for something he didn't do. All of this stacked neatly like boxes in my mind. One more box arrived when I learned the gala theme that year. It wasn't about him. It was about mentors. The room would celebrate people who lift others. The committee had collected real stories from kids who grew up with little and found a hand that helped them climb. The plan was simple: show short clips, share a name, ask for support. Perfect. The night would be about gratitude and proof. Nothing breaks a man who loves control like evidence he cannot bend. I still needed a fuse that wouldn't set me on fire too. Revenge can turn into a trap if you rush it. So I built distance with care. I volunteered to help edit tribute videos for the gala. Not high-level editing. The simple kind most people ignore. Clip names, trim silence, fix basic audio. The job nobody wanted because it wasn't glamorous. My face lit up like I was being fed dessert when I got the task. Small jobs open big doors. While scrubbing sound and smoothing cuts, I kept seeing the same pattern. Real mentors never wanted credit. Their names almost never showed up on screen first. The gratitude came from students who told plain stories using plain words. Harold had no part in those stories. He had his own segment, of course. A glossy package with stock music and slow shots of him looking thoughtful at a window. The narration called him a pillar, a rock, a bridge. The kind of words that sound heavy until you try to stand on them. The committee chair asked if I could standardize lower third name tags and unify a few fonts. I nodded like I had been waiting my whole life to align letters. Then, with permission that looked boring on paper, I gave the project one extra track. A timeline of receipt. Not numbers. Moments, clip, photos, screenshots of public posts he used to frame himself as the engine behind programs he barely visited. I didn't forge anything. I didn't break any walls. I simply stacked things he already put in public next to things that exposed the gap between his mouth and his hands. The contrast built itself. I found a community center he claimed to fund fully. Their page thanked 10 donors. His name sat third. I found a scholarship night where he grabbed the mic and turned 3 minutes into 20. The recipient posted later that they met him for the first time that evening. I found a video of him speaking over a student mid-sentence at last year's gala. He kept talking while the room tried to clap for the kid. The student's face told the whole story. That look stayed with me. Revenge, for me, wasn't about turning him into a villain. He did that by himself. I wanted the room to see the truth at the exact moment he expected worship. If the right truth drops at the wrong time for him, everything he built with applause will turn to dust. There was one more piece I needed. The suit. The same suit he mocked. The same suit that felt like the last handshake my father ever offered me. I decided to wear it to the gala. Not loudly. Not as a statement. I would simply show up looking like my father was walking with me again, silent and steady. The moment he saw it, he would feel the old pride in his throat again. He would try to crush it. He would expect me to bend. He would not be ready for the rest. On the night before the gala, I laid everything out on the bed. The suit. The small black tie my mother folded perfectly. The simple watch my father kept working long after it should have stopped. I looked at the watch and thought about time. Time forgives nothing and reveals everything. That felt like a promise. I tested the audio a final time. I double-checked names on the videos and confirmed the order with the chair. I asked harmless questions about stage lights and walk-on music, and made gentle suggestions that sounded like common sense. The chair appreciated how simple I made things. Simple is disarming. Simple carries a hidden blade when used right. When the day arrived, I walked into the ballroom early. The hall looked like a glass ship ready to sail. Candlelight floated under the stage. Towering flowers whispered over white tablecloth. Volunteers in black moved like notes in a soft song. I greeted people calmly. I greeted him too. He studied the suit and let his mouth curl into that same smirk I remembered from the wedding. He tried to make a joke for the people near him. Laughter bubbled up around his shoulders. It slid right past me like rain on a coat. I felt nothing. I had already built my weather. The program started. Applause lifted, then faded. The lights warmed the stage. Names rolled. Faces appeared, each story bright and honest. The room leaned forward. The feeling grew soft and human. It was the exact opposite of the energy he thrives on. He prefers sharp lines and hard spotlight. He likes praising himself with words that click like polished shoes on marble. Tonight sounded like sneakers on a playground. He didn't hear music. He heard static. He tapped his finger like a metronome against the tablecloth while he waited for his part. My timing lived on that impatient beat. When the host announced the signature tribute and called his name, the room clapped. He stood slowly, soaking it in, the way someone lifts a crown so everyone can see the jewels. He walked toward the stage with his head tilted back just enough to make the cameras catch his favorite angle. The screen behind him glowed. The first clip played. The story moved exactly as he expected for 5 full seconds. Polished shots. Smooth music. The host beamed. He squared his shoulders and rested one hand on the clear podium, ready to ride the tide. Then the tide turned. The video didn't attack him. It didn't accuse. It simply shifted to a student who talked about a mentor showing up every week after work with a quiet binder and a smile that meant business. The student described late nights, real help, and a door that never stayed closed. The mentor's name appeared on the screen. It wasn't his. The next clip showed 2 volunteers standing in a gym, pointing to a wall of names behind the basketball hoop. 10 names. His came third. The camera lingered on first and second a beat longer than normal. That beat felt like thunder in a silent room. The next clip returned to last year's gala for just one moment. The student started to speak. He stepped in front of the mic and kept talking. The room heard the interruption without anyone explaining it. The audio swelled back to the student later that night, standing in a hallway, thanking everyone but him. The camera cut to the community center director praising donors. She smiled into the lens the way people smile when they actually mean it. The final card landed on screen with a simple line about true mentors lifting others without needing to be seen. The music stopped. The lights held him in a gentle trap. The audience turned toward him with a new set of eyes. They weren't angry. They were awake. He cleared his throat, prepared to reclaim the moment. Except something curious happened. The host stepped forward, cheerful and smooth, and invited the student from the first clip to the stage for a surprise scholarship reveal. The room exploded with joy. The applause belonged to someone else now. He stood at the podium holding a smile that no longer fit his face. His speech cards might as well have been blank napkins. He tried to speak. The microphone stayed off. The tech crew followed the run of show that the committee had agreed on. The host moved the program along like a train on time. He hovered in a spotlight that hugged his shoulders but refused to warm him. I didn't touch a single rule. I didn't break a single line. I let the truth stand at the exact moment he reached for the crown. And for the first time since my wedding day, I felt my father's hand on my shoulder again, steady and certain, like a lighthouse behind me. The room didn't boo. That would have given him power. The room did something worse. It forgot him. Applause poured toward the student and never found its way back. His eyes found me in the third row. He recognized the suit first and then the calm behind it. He thought he could drown me with laughter once. Tonight he tasted a different kind of water. The kind that rises quietly while you keep insisting you can breathe. I folded my hands and held his stare without a word. The watch on my wrist ticked once, loud to me and invisible to everyone else, like the start of a countdown only 2 people could hear. The gala ended the way all big events do, with soft music, half-empty champagne glasses, and people pretending they weren't already thinking about where they parked. But for Harold, it ended with something far worse than public booing or a direct confrontation. It ended with silence. Not the pleasant, satisfied kind of silence after a good night, but the heavy, stale air that follows a joke no one laughed at. It clung to him like damp clothes. I stayed seated when the lights came up, letting the crowd move around me. I wanted him to feel it, the shifting conversations, the quick glances, the little nods of acknowledgement that passed him by. Normally, he would be shaking hands like a mayor, basking in compliments from people who barely knew him but wanted to be seen knowing him. But tonight the handshake line had vanished. People didn't want to be rude, they just had somewhere else to be. A few offered polite smiles, the way you might smile at a neighbor whose dog just ruined your lawn. Harold walked off the stage slowly, his speech cards still in hand. He kept glancing at them, as if hoping the words might rearrange themselves into something that could save him. But no matter how he shuffled them, the truth of the night stayed the same. His moment had been stolen by someone who didn't even try to steal it. I passed him on the way out, close enough for him to smell the faint cologne my father used to wear. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. Revenge didn't need words. Not yet. The car ride home with my wife was quiet. She tried to talk about the gala food, the decorations, the dresses. I nodded and gave short answers, pretending my mind wasn't replaying Harold's face during the video. That frozen smile. That tiny twitch in his jaw when the scholarship went to someone else. I didn't want her to suspect anything. She still thought what happened at the wedding was just one of Harold's bad moments. She didn't know I'd been keeping score. When we got home, I hung my father's suit back in the closet. It didn't feel like a relic anymore, it felt like armor. That night had been just the first strike. Harold was a man who could recover from one blow. His pride was stubborn. But if I kept applying pressure in public spaces he couldn't control, the cracks would spread. And I already knew where the next one would appear. Harold's company was hosting its annual leadership summit in 3 months. It was his other stage, the one where he played the visionary, the mentor, the genius businessman who could predict markets with the accuracy of a weather forecast in a desert. I didn't work for him, but I knew someone who did. And that someone owed me a favor. If the gala had been the appetizer, the summit would be the main course. And I was already sharpening the knife. The first thing about Harold's company's summit you should know is that it wasn't a meeting in any normal sense. It was a theatrical production disguised as a business event. He called it a leadership summit, but in reality, it was Harold's personal stage show, a place where he could pretend to be both the wise king and the conquering hero. And for 3 days, every manager, investor, and employee with any ambition was expected to show up and applaud at the right moments. I had never been invited before. Which made sense. Harold wasn't the type to give someone a ticket to his ego parade unless he thought it would benefit him. But this year, thanks to someone who owed me a favor, I was on the list. The favor came from Michael, a middle manager at Harold's company who once needed my help fixing a problem involving his teenage son. I won't get into details, but let's just say that when you help a man keep his kid out of serious trouble, he remembers. Michael knew all about Harold's big summit and how much it meant to him. When I asked if he could get me a pass, he didn't even hesitate. I didn't just get a pass. I got a backstage one. The summit was held at one of those giant downtown hotels with glass elevators and enough fake plants to make you think you were in a tropical garden. From the moment I walked in, I could see Harold's fingerprints everywhere, huge banners with slogans like "Vision for the Future" and "Leadership Through Excellence" printed next to his headshot. It was the kind of branding you'd expect from a politician running for office. In his own mind, the plan wasn't to confront him. Not yet. That would be too easy. The plan was to do something much slower, much more precise. Shift the audience's perception before Harold even realized it was happening. Because Harold's summit had one fatal weakness, it was full of people who already pretended to admire him, and pretending takes effort. If you give them a reason to stop pretending, they'll drop the act fast. I spent the first day walking the halls, talking to people like I belonged there. Employees, vendors, a couple of bored security guards, all of them had little stories about Harold. Most were harmless. He liked his coffee a certain way, he always got the corner suite, he hated when people used too many PowerPoint animations. But every now and then, I'd hear something more telling. A grumble about how he took credit for projects he didn't touch. A laugh about how he always gave inspiring speeches that were just the same recycled lines from years past. By the second day, I knew exactly how I'd hit him. One of Harold's prize segments was the Leader Spotlight, where he presented an award to an employee for outstanding contribution to the company. It was supposed to be heartfelt, genuine, and inspiring. It was also carefully staged. Harold's team would pick someone who wouldn't overshadow him and would gush about him on stage. But this year, I'd learned from Michael that the real selection process was messy. The employee who deserved the award had been passed over in favor of someone Harold thought looked better in photos. That real winner? She was still here at the summit, sitting quietly in the back, clearly bitter but professional about the snub. Her name was Lila, and when I introduced myself and started chatting, I realized two things. 1, she was smarter than half the people in that hotel put together, and 2, she didn't like Harold at all. Over coffee, I planted the idea. Not an outright suggestion, just a seed. I told her how I'd seen leaders miss the chance to thank the people who truly made a difference, and how powerful it was when the truth came out anyway. She didn't say she'd do anything, but I could see it in her eyes. She'd been waiting for someone to give her permission. The next day, during the awards ceremony, the script went as planned. Harold smiled, called the chosen name, and posed for pictures. The room clapped politely. Then, from the back, Lila stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She simply walked to the mic during the transition between speakers and thanked her team for their work. And in the most casual tone possible, she mentioned the project that had saved the company millions, the one she had led. The one Harold had ignored. The audience turned to her like plants finding sunlight. You could feel the shift in the air. And Harold? He was frozen at the edge of the stage, forced to keep smiling as the room realized he'd skipped over the real hero of the year. That was the beauty of it. I didn't even need to say a word to hurt him. I just made sure the truth had a microphone. By the time the applause for Lila died down, Harold's smile had calcified into something tight and unnatural. He didn't clap, he couldn't. He just stood there, gripping the side of the podium like it might float him to safety. When the next scheduled speaker started, he slipped off the stage and disappeared backstage. I didn't follow him, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I found a seat near the side of the room, where I could watch him return. And when he did, he saw me. Not just noticed me, saw me. His eyes locked on mine in a way that told me the comfortable haze of his own ego had finally thinned enough for him to suspect something. That was the first real moment he understood there might be a hand guiding the little cracks in his perfect image. He didn't storm over. Harold wasn't the type to lose his temper in public. He played the long game, or at least he thought he did. But his face said enough, that subtle flare of the nostrils, the fraction of a second too long he held eye contact. That was the moment our quiet war became a two-player game. The rest of the summit day was delicious. Every time he passed me in the hallway, he'd slow down just enough to signal he was clocking my every move. The people around him didn't notice. They were too busy laughing at his jokes or nodding at his advice. But I could feel it, that awareness, that tightening coil in him. In a way, that was better than any public humiliation. Because now, every room we shared was going to feel smaller for him. Every casual smile I gave would carry a question he couldn't answer. But I wasn't done. When the summit ended that afternoon, there was an evening networking event in one of the hotel's rooftop lounges, a place with dim lighting, a skyline view, and just enough alcohol to make people say things they normally wouldn't. That's where I made my next move. I didn't approach Harold directly. Instead, I moved through the crowd, chatting with people I'd met over the last 2 days, telling small, harmless stories that happened to contain one key element, the truth about Lila's project. Not in a gossipy way, but in a tone of casual admiration. Oh, did you hear? She was the one who actually led the redesign. Incredible work. By the third retelling, I could already see the ripples. People started repeating it to others. The next thing I knew, a group near the bar was openly questioning why Harold hadn't mentioned her in his award presentation. And Harold? He was across the room, watching it happen. I didn't need to hear his thoughts to know what they were. This isn't coincidence. For the first time, I think he realized I wasn't just the quiet son-in-law who'd stood there at the wedding and taken his insult. I was something worse. I was patient. And patience, when weaponized, is terrifying. I knew Harold wouldn't sit back forever. Men like him don't just absorb a blow, they have to answer it. And when they do, they don't come at you swinging. They come at you smiling. It happened a week after the summit, at a family dinner my wife insisted we attend. I didn't mind, in fact, I'd been hoping for it. If Harold was going to make his first move, It would be somewhere he thought he had home advantage. Dinner was at his house, a sprawling place with the kind of dining table that could seat a medieval army. I barely sat down before I felt it. That charged air, like before a storm. My wife was chatting with her mother, oblivious, while Harold poured himself a drink. He started light. Compliments on the food, polite small talk. But then he leaned back in his chair and, without looking directly at me, started telling a funny story about the wedding. About my suit. He didn't repeat the same words he'd used that day. He wasn't that foolish. This time, it was a carefully constructed anecdote about how some people don't understand the importance of appearances in important events. He never said my name, but he didn't have to. The relatives laughed politely, but their eyes flicked between us. He wanted me to flinch. He wanted to plant a seed of embarrassment in front of my wife, make it seem like he was just teasing, while also reminding me he could still draw blood. I let him finish. I even chuckled a little, just enough to make him think I'd let it slide. But as dessert came out, I made my move. I didn't attack him. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply told a story of my own, about a recent gala I'd attended. How inspiring it was to see a young student get a scholarship after years of hard work, and how sometimes the best leaders are the ones who quietly stand behind others instead of taking the spotlight. It wasn't loud. It wasn't direct. But every word landed exactly where I aimed it. People at the table nodded. A few even murmured about how true that is. Harold didn't touch his dessert. From then on, the dinner was polite but colder. The man who usually dominated the room stayed quieter, as if he couldn't decide whether he'd just been hit or whether he was imagining it. That was perfect. Doubt is its own poison. By the time we left, I knew the next step. Harold thought of himself as untouchable in business and unshakable in reputation. But there was one arena he hadn't guarded properly, his own community. And I had just found a way to turn that very community into a mirror he couldn't bear to look into. Harold's social circle wasn't just a group of friends. It was an ecosystem he'd built over decades, full of people who owed him favors, feared his disapproval, or fed on the scraps of his influence. In his mind, they were loyal because they liked him. In reality, they stayed close because it was safer than being outside his reach. The problem with building an empire on fear is simple. It only works as long as people believe you're untouchable. Crack that belief, and the whole thing starts to shake. I didn't need to destroy him in one strike, just shift the ground under his feet until the people who clapped for him started looking at each other instead. The opportunity came through something as harmless as a charity barbecue. One of Harold's oldest friends, a man named Stan, hosted it every summer in his huge backyard. It wasn't black tie or high profile, but everyone from Harold's inner circle showed up. It was where deals were whispered over beer and bragging rights were earned with golf scores and expensive cigars. I didn't even need an invitation. Stan's wife, Linda, adored my wife and thought I was the only sensible man in the family. One casual text later, we were on the guest list. When we arrived, Harold was already there, holding court near the grill. He wore one of those pastel polo shirts that looked like it had been chosen for a yacht trip, not a cookout. The way he greeted me was almost too friendly. That meant he was still playing the part. He hadn't realized yet that I was about to rewrite his script. The trick was simple. I didn't talk about Harold at all. I talked about other people, their achievements, their kindness, the things they'd done quietly without needing credit. I made it sound like I was just appreciating them, but the contrast was impossible to miss. Then I started slipping in stories from the gala and the summit, always making sure the focus was on the real heroes, Lila, the student, the volunteers. I never exaggerated. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. And because I spoke with admiration, not bitterness, people listened. By the time Harold joined a group I was in, the air had shifted. He tried to steer the conversation back to his usual success stories, but something was different. People weren't leaning in the same way. A few gave polite nods, but others glanced away, like they were no longer buying the show. The real turning point came when Stan himself asked me, in front of Harold, about the gala video. I heard it was interesting this year, he said, with that careful tone people use when they're fishing for details. I smiled and told the short version, all fact, no embellishment. The scholarship, the student, the applause, the unplanned highlight of the night. Harold laughed, too loud, too forced. Well, he said, sometimes the spotlight just finds the wrong person. No one laughed with him. It was a small moment, maybe even invisible to someone who didn't know Harold. But I saw it. The crack widened. The people who once feared missing his approval now had something more powerful, a reason to doubt him. The barbecue ended with Harold leaving earlier than usual. No grand goodbye, no handshakes on the way out. Just a quiet retreat, as if he had somewhere better to be. But I knew exactly where he was headed, home, to stare at the ceiling, replaying the night in his head and wondering how much control he'd actually lost. And the beauty of it? I was just getting started. Harold's final undoing came courtesy of his favorite annual spectacle, the Business Excellence Awards. If the gala was his red carpet, this was his coronation. Black tie, televised locally, with every major player in the city sitting under golden spotlight. Harold had chaired the event for years, and every time, he made sure his own name echoed through the room more than anyone else's. This year I was ready. By now, the cracks in his image had spread wide enough that I didn't need to twist any arms. People were already starting to see him differently. All I had to do was give them a moment they couldn't unsee. It started 2 weeks before the event. Through a contact in the event's media team, someone I'd met at the summit, I learned they were putting together a tribute segment for Leaders Who Inspire. Harold had, of course, volunteered to be featured, complete with pre-approved talking points and flattering photos. I made a suggestion to my contact, couched in admiration for Harold's commitment to mentorship. I recommended they also highlight the teams and individuals whose work had truly made an impact, to show the spirit of collective leadership. She loved the idea. The planning committee approved it without a second thought. The twist? I fed them names. Not random ones, the same people Harold had sidelined or overshadowed over the years. People with receipts, literal and figurative. Lila was on the list. So was the community center director. And each of them, in their recorded clips, spoke plainly about their achievements, without Harold in the picture. I didn't add a single insult or accusation. The truth was more than enough. On the night of the awards, Harold was dressed like a monarch, crisp tuxedo, polished shoes, that smug gleam he wore when he knew cameras were pointed at him. I was seated 3 tables back, close enough to watch the whole thing unfold. The tribute began. At first, it was everything Harold expected. Shots of him shaking hands, standing at podiums, laughing in perfectly framed photograph. He leaned back in his chair, smiling like a man basking in sunlight. Then came the shift. The screen cut to Lila, talking about the redesign project that saved the company millions. She named her team. She didn't name Harold. Applause erupted. Next was the student from the gala, holding up the scholarship certificate and thanking the mentors who showed up week after week, none of whom were Harold. Another wave of applause. Clip after clip rolled, each one peeling away another layer of his self-made myth. Not one person in the segment credited him for their success. Not one. The pattern was so obvious the audience couldn't miss it. And then, just when the applause was reaching its peak, the camera cut to Harold live in the room. He wasn't smiling anymore. The lights caught the tension in his jaw, the stiffness in his shoulders. It was the first time in all the years of these awards that he looked small. The segment ended with a simple on-screen line, "True leadership lifts others." The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation. For everyone but him. When the applause died, the host thanked the honorees and moved on without mentioning Harold's name again. It was subtle, but in a room full of people trained to notice social cues, it was a bullet. For the rest of the night, Harold sat there, surrounded by the same faces that used to feed his ego, but now, they were different. Some offered polite smiles, others avoided his gaze entirely. The conversations at his table flowed around him instead of through him. And I sipped my drink, watching the crown slip quietly from his head. No shouting, no confrontation. Just the weight of the truth, settling over him like a curtain falling at the end of a play. The king had been dethroned. And the audience had watched it happen. The week after the Business Excellence Awards, Harold disappeared. Not in a dramatic way, no public statements, no angry outbursts, just a slow retreat into silence. He skipped meetings he never used to miss. He turned down invitations that once fed his ego. And the few times I saw him at family gatherings, he spoke less, smiled less, and avoided eye contact altogether. I didn't need to hear the gossip to know what was happening. His social circle had shifted. The people who used to hang on his every word were now leaning toward others. Deals were being made without him. Invitations went out with his name further down the list, or not at all. It wasn't that they hated him. It was worse, they'd stopped seeing him as important. And that was permanent. At home, my wife noticed the change too. She didn't know the full extent of what I'd done, but she sensed the tension between Harold and me had cooled into something strange. She asked once, softly, if I thought things with her father would ever go back to normal. I told her the truth. They've just found a new normal. The suit, my father's suit, hung in my closet the whole time. It had been cleaned, pressed, and carefully covered, but I still saw it every morning when I opened the door. To anyone else, it was just a piece of clothing. To me, it was proof. Proof that dignity doesn't come from how expensive something looks, it comes from how you carry it, and from the people whose memory you honor. Harold had mocked it because he couldn't see past the fabric. But in the end, it was the suit, and what it stood for, that gave me the patience to take him apart without raising my voice once. The night of the awards was the last time I actively moved against him. Not because I couldn't go further, but because I didn't need to. The damage wasn't reversible, and he knew it. Every room he walked into now carried an echo of that tribute video, that gala, that barbecue. He could rebuild pieces of his image, sure, but the full shine was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Sometimes, people expect revenge to feel like fireworks, loud, bright, explosive. Mine wasn't like that. It was quieter, more deliberate. It was like cutting the strings on a puppet and watching it slowly collapse, one limb at a time. And in that quiet, I finally felt my father's presence again. Not in grief, not in longing, but in pride. The same pride he must have felt wearing that suit years ago, standing beside my mother, knowing he didn't need anyone else's approval to be the man he was. I didn't humiliate Harold just for myself. I did it for the man who couldn't be there to defend me at my wedding. And I did it in a way he would have respected, with patience, precision, and an unshakable smile. In the end, Harold and I never spoke about it. Not once. We didn't need to. Because every time our eyes meet now, he knows exactly what I did. And I know he'll never forget it. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. That's free and only way to support us. Thank you.